I work the overnight shift at station WXR 77, a small emergency broadcast station on the outskirts of town. It's the kind of place no one really thinks about unless something goes horribly wrong. A few local stations pick up our feeds, mostly weather alerts, road closures, and the occasional missing person report. Quiet work, lonely work. But that's exactly why I took the job. At 2:13 a.m., the emergency alert tone cut through my broadcast like a knife. I nearly spilled my coffee as the blaring alarm rattled through the speakers, the kind of sound that makes your stomach tighten. I hadn't triggered anything, and there weren't any scheduled tests. The system only activated in emergencies, and I hadn't received a warning from higher up. The message came through in that cold, robotic voice the government used for alerts. This is a statewide emergency. Do not acknowledge the voices outside. Repeat, do not acknowledge the voices outside. Shelter in place until further notice. I stared at the monitor, my pulse hammering in my ears. That was it. No context, no explanation, just that chilling directive. I grabbed my phone to check for any news updates, but there was nothing. No breaking reports, no chatter on social media, no chatter at all. The internet was working, but local news sites weren't updating. It was like the world had hit pause. Then the station phone rang. I hesitated before picking it up. WXR 77 emergency broadcast. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. A man's voice came through, trembling. Is this real? Sir, I need you to clarify. What are you talking about? The alert, he whispered. I just heard it on my radio. I thought it was some kind of test, but then I heard them. A cold weight settled in my chest. Who did you hear? He sucked in a breath. My mom. She's been dead for 4 years. I gripped the receiver. Sir, are you saying you're hearing her voice outside? Static crackled on the line. She's out there. Right now. She keeps knocking on the door, asking me to let her in. A deep shiver crawled up my spine. Don't respond. Don't open the door. I know, he whispered. I know I shouldn't, but she sounds right. She sounds just like her. She keeps saying my name, saying she's cold. She. A loud knock cut through the call, followed by the sound of shuffling. Then silence. Sir? I pressed. Are you still there? Nothing. Just the low hum of dead air. I set the receiver down with a shaking hand and checked the station doors. Locked. The windows? Locked. But then I heard it. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. Right against the glass of the front door. I froze. The security camera feed was up on my monitor, but the outside cameras were glitching. No static, no distortion, just a complete blackout, like something was standing directly in front of them. Then, the knocking came again. And a voice. Hey, it's me. Let me in. A chill stabbed through me. I knew that voice. It was Brian. My coworker. My friend. The guy who went missing last week. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The voice came again, closer this time. Come on, man. It's cold out here. Just open up real quick. I forced myself to look away from the door. The emergency alert was still looping on the radio. Do not acknowledge the voices outside. Shelter in place until further notice. I reached for my phone to call the police. No dial tone. The line was still open from my last call, but no one was there. The voice outside the door grew softer. You can hear me, right? It asked. I shut my eyes and gritted my teeth. Then a different voice joined in. A woman's voice. Sweetheart, it said, it's Mom. Open the door. My breath hitched. My mother died when I was 12. And yet, the voice was perfect. Every syllable, every inflection. I could almost hear the warmth she used to have. The temptation to respond itched in my skull. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. No, I wouldn't acknowledge it. I turned back to the monitor. The outside cameras were still blacked out, but the inside ones were still working. I clicked through the security feeds, scanning every room. Empty. I was alone. Then, I checked the hallway outside the broadcast room. And my stomach dropped. The door to the generator room was wide open. I didn't leave it like that. As I stared at the screen, the emergency alert played again. Do not acknowledge the voices outside. But this time, at the very end, something changed. A new line of text appeared on my monitor. Do not acknowledge the voices inside. I didn't move. Then, in the hallway camera feed, I saw something shift. A shadow, long stretched. Not mine. And then a whisper. Right behind me. Hey, I know you can hear me. I didn't turn around. Every instinct in my body told me to look, to confirm that I wasn't alone anymore, but I knew that if I acknowledged whatever was standing behind me, I wouldn't be able to take it back. My breath came in shallow gasps. The emergency alert was still playing over the station speakers, but the words had lost all meaning. The voice outside, Brian's voice, my mother's voice, had gone silent. But this new voice, the one inside the station, it was right behind me. A slow, dragging breath sounded inches from my ear. Don't ignore me. I squeezed my eyes shut and gritted my teeth. Don't acknowledge it. Don't acknowledge it. The whispering thing in the hallway wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Another shift in the security feed caught my eye. The hallway camera glitched, static creeping along the edges of the screen like something was interfering with the signal. The open door to the generator room was still visible, but now there was a shape standing in the doorway. A silhouette, tall, unmoving, featureless. And then, as if sensing my gaze, it turned. Not its head, not its body. The entire shadow twisted. A sharp, unnatural motion, like it had been flipped inside out. My stomach flipped with it. The whisper came again, closer. You can hear me, can't you? A low knock sounded against the radio console. Not from the speakers. Not from the door. From right beside me. I shot up from my chair, heart hammering. I still refused to look, but I could feel it. The air had gone heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. My skin crawled. The emergency alert cut out abruptly, leaving only the low hum of the station's power. Silence. And then my own voice whispered, "You already acknowledged me." A breath hitched in my throat. No, I hadn't. I hadn't said a word. I grabbed the station phone with trembling fingers, still no dial tone. The landline was dead. My cell? No signal. The internet? Gone. I was completely cut off. I needed to get out. I moved toward the hallway, but my own reflection in the dark window made me stop. Something was wrong. My reflection was standing still. I had been mid-step, moving toward the door, but the version of me in the glass, it hadn't moved at all. Then slowly it smiled. A smile too wide. I stumbled back, and as I did, a sharp, metallic bang echoed through the station. The front door. The voices outside were back. Brian's voice. My mother's voice. Other voices now too. Please open up. We just want to talk. Sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm worried about you. The knocking turned to pounding. I backed away from the window, refusing to look at my reflection again. Then, creak. A soft sound, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. The open generator room door. It had moved. Not swung open. Not closed. Shifted. Like something had slid it into another position without actually touching it. A wave of nausea rolled over me. The emergency alert had told us to stay inside. But now I understood something far, far worse. Inside wasn't safe either. A sudden noise, the sound of the radio turning on by itself, made me flinch. Static. Garbled voices. Then, my own voice again. You can't ignore us forever. I slammed my hands over my ears. No. The pounding on the front door had stopped. The voices outside had gone silent. But the air still felt charged, electric. I had to make a decision. Stay inside with whatever had entered the station with me, or go outside and face the voices. Neither option felt like survival. I reached for my keys with shaking hands. The station van was parked out back. If I moved fast enough, I could make a break for it. But as I turned toward the door, my body locked up. Because something was blocking the exit. It looked like me. Not the me in the window, not the twisted, smiling thing reflecting back at me. No, this one stood in the hallway, still as stone. A perfect copy, wearing my clothes, my face. But the eyes weren't mine. They were black, empty. A voice, my own voice, came from its mouth. You can't leave. You let me in. My stomach dropped. No, that wasn't true. I hadn't acknowledged it. I had been careful. Hadn't I? The thing tilted its head. Are you sure? Then it smiled. The lights in the station flickered violently. The emergency alert blared back to life, this time distorted and stretched, playing at half speed like a dying tape recorder. And from outside, the voices began again. But this time, they weren't asking to be let in. This time, they were laughing. I took a shaky step back, but my double mirrored the movement. I reached for the nearest object, a metal flashlight on the desk, and threw it as hard as I could. The impact hit nothing. The thing wasn't solid. And yet, when it stepped forward, the floorboards creaked under its weight. A rush of cold air surged through the room. The radio static grew louder, overlapping layers of whispers, dozens of voices speaking at once. Then among them, one clear voice, a voice I hadn't heard in years. My mother's real voice. Run. And I did. I turned and ran for the back door, keys clutched so tight they cut into my palm. The last thing I saw before I threw myself into the night was my own face smiling back at me from inside the station. And it was still smiling when the door slammed shut behind me. I barely made it to the van. The air outside was thick, unnatural, pressing against my skin like something unseen was waiting to smother me. The station's floodlights flickered, casting warped shadows against the pavement. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hands fumbled with the keys as I reached the driver's side door. My own breath sounded wrong, too loud, like an echo that didn't quite match my movements. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. For a moment, there was only silence, except for the distant hum of the emergency broadcast still playing from the station speakers. Do not acknowledge the voices outside. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My stomach twisted as I turned toward the passenger seat. At first, it looked empty. Then, in the dim glow of the dashboard, I saw the impression of someone sitting there. Not a body, a shadow of one. Like something was trying to pretend it belonged in that space, but the shape wasn't quite right. My fingers trembled as I reached for the ignition. The shadow twitched. A voice, asterisk, not mine, but close enough to send bile up my throat, asterisk, spoke softly from the passenger seat. You shouldn't have left. I turned the key. The van roared to life, and as the headlights cut through the darkness, I finally dared to look at the station. My double was still standing at the window watching me. Still smiling. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I peeled out of the parking lot, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The town was about 10 miles south, a straight shot down a winding wooded road. I kept my eyes dead ahead, but as I drove, the shadow in the passenger seat grew darker. And then, it leaned closer. You're going the wrong way. I didn't respond. Don't acknowledge it. Don't acknowledge it. The static from the radio surged to life, drowning the silence in a wall of shrill white noise. Then a voice. Not from the passenger seat. Not from the speakers. From the CB radio. A man's voice, frantic. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? I don't know what's happening. I grabbed the receiver, my hands slick with sweat. I hear you. Who is this? A pause. A shaky breath. Name's Russ. Jesus, man, I don't know what's going on. I was driving through town when I heard the alert. Then, his voice broke. Then the voices started. My pulse pounded. Where are you now? Pulaski Highway. About a mile past the gas station. My truck won't start, and... A sudden crackling noise swallowed his words. Then, in a much softer voice, something else came through the line. You're not alone in the car, are you? I slammed the radio off. The shadow beside me shifted. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the road. I was almost at the gas station. I could still see the lights in the distance, a hazy glow through the trees. That's when the laughter started. Not from the passenger seat. Not from the radio. From the woods. It started as a single voice, breathy and distant. Then it split, doubling, tripling, becoming a chorus of wet, giggling sounds that echoed from the trees on both sides of the road. I swallowed down a scream. The van's headlights flickered. The road ahead looked wrong, stretched and warped, like the asphalt was shifting under an invisible force. Then, through the windshield, I saw something standing in the middle of the road. I barely had time to react before I swerved, the van skidding violently onto the shoulder. The tires hit loose gravel. I fought for control, but the steering wheel jerked on its own, twisting under my grip. The van lurched off the road and into the ditch. For a few seconds, everything blurred, metal groaning, my head snapping forward, the dull pop of the airbag deploying. Then silence. I was alive, but something was standing outside the van. I forced myself to look through the shattered windshield. The figure was tall, impossibly thin. Its face was smooth, empty. But the worst part, was the way it moved. A slow, jerking twitch, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. Then it tilted its head. A voice, my mother's voice, came from its mouth. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" A choked breath rattled out of my lungs. No. I ripped off my seatbelt and scrambled for the door. The thing stepped forward, not walking, just appearing closer. The moment my feet hit the ground, a sharp pain shot up my ankle. I stumbled, falling into the grass. The laughter from the woods grew louder. Then, a voice from the CB radio. Hey, I see your van. You okay?" "Russ." I turned my head toward the road. A set of headlights had appeared further down the highway, illuminating the trees in pale yellow. The thing standing in front of my van snapped its head toward the truck. Then, without moving its legs, it drifted back into the darkness. My entire body trembled as Russ's truck pulled onto the shoulder. The driver's side door swung open, and a real person, a living, breathing person, stepped out. Russ was tall, bearded, wearing a faded flannel and jeans. He squinted at me through the darkness. "Jesus, man, are you hurt?" I couldn't speak. The radio's emergency alert blared from his truck speakers. "Do not acknowledge the voices outside." Russ glanced at his speakers, then at me. "I think we've got a problem," he muttered. I let out a hollow, shaking laugh. "You have no idea." Russ helped me to my feet, his grip firm and real, so real that I nearly collapsed from sheer relief. "You sure you're not hurt?" he asked, glancing at my ankle. I nodded, though pain still flared every time I shifted my weight. "I'm fine, Elite." Russ's truck idled on the side of the road, headlights cutting through the darkness. But the woods beyond them, something wasn't right. The trees weren't still. They breathed, shifting unnaturally, like something massive was weaving through them just out of sight. Russ must have noticed my expression because he muttered, "Yeah, he saw me, too." I swallowed. "Saw what?" He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "The voices. The things. They ain't just people talking from the dark. I saw one when I pulled over. Looked like my brother, but wrong. Like it was wearing his face, but didn't know how to use it." I shuddered. "They copy us." "Seems that way," Russ said, his voice low. A burst of laughter rippled from the trees. "Close. Too close." We both turned sharply toward the sound, and my stomach clenched. Something was coming. Russ grabbed my arm and yanked me toward his truck. "We gotta go. Now." I didn't argue. I limped as fast as I could, my pulse hammering as we scrambled inside. The moment the doors slammed shut, Russ threw the truck into reverse. The tires skidded over gravel as he turned back onto the highway, pressing the gas hard. For a second, I thought we were safe. Then, a thump. Something hit the roof. Russ and I both froze. A long, scraping sound followed, like fingernails dragging across metal. Then, from above us, a voice whispered through the thin barrier of the truck's roof. "Don't leave us." Russ floored it. The truck roared forward, hitting 80 miles per hour, then 90. The thing on the roof didn't fall off. It crawled, a slow, methodical movement, shifting from the back of the truck toward the windshield. I could hear it breathing. Then, 2 hands slapped against the glass. I gasped. The fingers were too long, the skin too smooth. And when I finally forced myself to look up, it was me. My own face staring back at me, pressed against the windshield, mouth curled into a hideous mockery of a smile. Russ swore and jerked the wheel. The truck swerved violently, tires shrieking against the asphalt. The impact finally threw the thing off. Russ didn't slow down. We sped past empty houses, darkened storefronts, streets completely deserted. The The town should have been awake. People should have been outside, reacting to the emergency alert. But there was no one. No movement. No cars on the road. No lights in windows. The entire town had gone silent. Russ's hands tightened on the wheel. "This ain't right," he muttered. I swallowed. "Where is everyone?" A flicker of movement caught my eye. Down one of the side streets, standing in the glow of a flickering street lamp, was a woman. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there, staring straight ahead. As we passed, her head snapped toward us. My heart seized. Russ slammed the brakes. "Did you see that?" The woman twitched. Then, she started running. Not toward us, alongside us. Her body didn't move right. Every step was stiff, unnatural, but she was keeping up with the truck. Then more of them. Dozens. Lined along the sidewalks. Waiting. And when they saw us, they all turned at once. Then they started laughing. Russ hit the gas. "Screw this." The truck surged forward, leaving them behind. I forced myself to breathe. "Where are we going?" Russ clenched his jaw. "The station. Fire, police, something. Somebody's got to be in charge of this mess." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I glanced at my phone. Still no signal. But there was one notification. A new emergency alert. I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. The message was different now. It read, "Emergency alert. Do not acknowledge the imitators. Do not respond to them. Do not speak to them. Do not look at them. Do not let them hear you." I barely had time to process the message when Russ swore loudly. I looked up. We had reached the police station, and the doors were wide open. A single patrol car sat idling outside, lights still flashing. But there was no one inside. Russ killed the engine. This ain't right. No kidding. I hesitated, then reached for the door handle. Russ grabbed my arm. "Wait." A shape moved inside the station. A silhouette against the dim emergency lights. Russ and I froze. The shape moved toward the door, then stopped. Then, a voice called out, "Hello. Please, please help me." A woman. Crying. Desperate. I started forward, but Russ grabbed my wrist, eyes wide. "Don't." I swallowed hard. It could be real. Russ shook his head. Or it could be one of them. My pulse pounded in my ears. The woman sobbed. "Please, I don't know what's happening. I don't want to be alone." A long, awful pause. Then she said, "Are you going to ignore me too?" The hairs on my arms stood up. Something shifted. The woman stepped into the light. And I knew in that moment that Russ was right. She looked human. Perfectly human. But her eyes were wrong. There was nothing behind them. Just emptiness. Russ inhaled sharply. "Get back in the truck." I didn't argue. As I turned to climb back inside, the woman tilted her head. Then, in a voice that wasn't hers, she spoke directly to me. "You already let one of us in, didn't you?" My stomach plummeted. Russ shoved me toward the truck. "We are leaving. Right now." The woman smiled. Not at Russ. At me. Then in my voice she whispered, "You can't run forever." Russ peeled out before she could say anything else. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was more of them, stepping out of the station, watching us go. We had nowhere left to run. Russ didn't say a word as he floored it down the empty street, the truck's tires screeching against the pavement. I clutched the door, my mind racing. The woman at the station. Her words were still rattling in my skull. "You already let one of us in, didn't you?" I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something I didn't. The dashboard glowed dimly in the dark, casting eerie shadows across Russ's face. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the wheel like a vice. He hadn't even looked at me since we left the police station. Finally, I broke the silence. "Where the hell are we going?" "Somewhere safe," he muttered. I almost laughed. "You really think there's a safe place left in this town?" Russ didn't answer. He just kept driving. The streets were abandoned. No headlights, no signs of life. The emergency alert still hummed from the truck speakers, repeating its warning in that same cold, monotone voice. "Do not acknowledge the imitators. Do not respond to them. Do not speak to them. Do not look at them. Do not let them hear you." Something about the wording had changed. Do not let them hear you. I didn't remember it saying that before. I swallowed hard. Russ. Nothing. I turned to him, suddenly uneasy. He was too still. Russ. No response. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. My grip on the door handle tightened. Say something. Slowly, Russ turned his head toward me. I wish he hadn't. Because the second I saw his face, I knew. It wasn't him. His mouth was wrong. Stretched too wide, the corners curling up in an expression that didn't belong on his face. And his eyes were too dark, too empty. And then he said it. You didn't think you were really alone, did you? I lunged for the door handle. The truck swerved violently as I threw myself out, landing hard against the pavement. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The truck screeched to a halt about 20 feet away. And then, the door opened. Russ stepped out. But he didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. Then he laughed. Not Russ's laugh. Something else. It echoed, warping unnaturally, like more than one voice was speaking at the same time. I took a shaky step backward. Russ's head tilted, his grin widening. You can't run forever. I turned and bolted. The town was dead silent. Every door shut. Every window dark. It was as if the entire world had stopped breathing. I sprinted down the street, dodging between abandoned cars, past darkened storefronts. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The sound of footsteps pounded behind me. But not just one set. Many. I risked a glance over my shoulder. And my stomach dropped. They were everywhere. Figures emerging from the shadows, stepping out from alleys, from behind cars. Some of them looked like people I knew. A neighbor. A girl I went to school with. The guy who worked at the gas station. All of them watching me. All of them smiling. And then they started running. I ran faster. My legs screamed, my vision blurred. I needed to find somewhere, anywhere to hide. That's when I saw it. A house. The front door was slightly open. A sliver of dim, flickering light spilled onto the porch. I didn't think. I sprinted up the steps and shoved the door open. The second I crossed the threshold, I slammed it shut and locked it. Then silence. For a long moment, I just stood there, chest heaving. Then, from deeper inside the house, a voice called out. Who's there? A real voice. Not warped, not duplicated. Real. I took a shaky breath. I need help. The sound of footsteps. Then, from the hallway, a man appeared. Middle-aged, rugged-looking, a shotgun clutched in his hands. His eyes were wide, but not empty. Not like them. He exhaled sharply when he saw me. Jesus Christ. You're not one of them, are you? I shook my head. He hesitated, then nodded. All right. Come on. We need to stay quiet. I followed him deeper into the house. The windows were covered. The lights were dim. The living room was cluttered with supplies, food, water, extra ammo. It looked like he'd been here for a while. He gestured for me to sit. Name's Carter. I swallowed. Doesn't matter, he interrupted. You're alive. That's what matters. I nodded numbly. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could finally breathe. Carter studied me for a long moment, then asked, How much do you know? I hesitated. Not enough. Carter exhaled. Yeah, nobody does. He rubbed his jaw, eyes flicking toward the covered window. They've been here for 3 days. At first, we thought it was some kind of emergency, gas leak, chemical spill. But then people started disappearing. And then they started coming back. My stomach twisted. Carter continued, his voice grim. They look like us. Sound like us. But they aren't us. I swallowed hard. How do you know who's real? Carter's expression darkened. You don't. The air in the room felt heavier. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then, a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then a voice. Hey Carter. It's me. Carter went rigid. I stared at him, my pulse spiking. Then the voice spoke again. I know you're in there. And I swear to God. It sounded exactly like him. The knock came again, 3 slow, deliberate taps. Carter. Let me in. My breath caught in my throat. The voice on the other side of the door, it was him. It was Carter. Exactly the same. Same gruff tone, same quiet rasp. But Carter was standing right beside me. My eyes flicked to him. His face had gone pale, his grip on the shotgun tightening until his knuckles turned white. "Come on, Carter. It's cold out here." I took a slow step back. My entire body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Carter didn't move, didn't even breathe. He just stared at the door, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. Then the voice spoke again. "What's wrong? Don't you recognize your own voice?" A chill ripped through my body. Carter let out a slow breath, then, almost too soft to hear, he whispered, "They're learning." A wave of nausea crashed over me. The thing outside the door knocked again, but this time, it didn't wait for an answer. The doorknob twisted. Carter moved fast. Faster than I expected. He raised the shotgun and pressed the barrel against the door, right where a head would be. "Back away," he ordered, voice low and steady. For a long moment, silence. Then, "That's not very neighborly of you." Something about the way it said it, something was different now. The tone had changed. The voice wasn't perfect anymore. Like it had started breaking apart, as if it wasn't sure how to hold itself together. Carter didn't lower the gun. "We can do this all night." That sent a jolt of cold terror through me. The thing wasn't leaving. I exchanged a look with Carter. He gave the smallest shake of his head, as if to say, "Don't make a sound." Then, from outside, the voice started humming. A low, tuneless sound, vibrating through the walls. Off-key broken wrong. And then, more voices joined in. My stomach dropped. I turned my head just enough to glance at the window. And there, just barely visible through the cracks in the boarded-up glass, they were gathering. Silhouettes in the dark, standing in the street, on the lawn, motionless, humming. The sound grew louder, deeper. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it wasn't just noise. It was inside me, crawling under my skin, vibrating in my bones. Carter cursed under his breath. He grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the back of the house. "They're trying to mess with our heads," he muttered. The humming stopped, and in the silence, a new voice spoke. "She already let one of us in, Carter." My blood froze. I felt Carter's grip tighten on my arm. "Didn't you wonder why she was out there all alone?" I shook my head frantically. "That's not true." The voice chuckled. "You sure about that?" I whipped around to look at Carter, my throat dry. "You can't believe them. They lie. That's what they do." Carter didn't respond. He was staring at me. I took a shaky step back. "Carter." The shotgun never wavered. His eyes searched mine. Then he muttered, "Tell me something only a real person would know." "What?" I gasped. "You heard me." His jaw tightened. "If you're real, prove it." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was blank. Completely blank. "How the hell do you prove you're real?" "She doesn't know," the voice outside taunted. I turned to the window again. The crowd had grown. Dozens of them now. And all of them had the same face. Mine. Staring at the house, smiling. Carter saw them too. His breathing was getting faster, more uneven. He was panicking. We didn't have much time. I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Listen to me, Carter. I don't know how to prove I'm real. But neither do you. None of us do. If we start doubting each other, we're already dead." His grip on the gun didn't loosen. Outside, the thing pretending to be Carter laughed softly. "She's good, isn't she?" I stepped forward, pressing my hands to Carter's chest. "Please. We need to focus. Right now, the only thing we know for sure is that they are out there, and we are in here. That has to count for something." His jaw clenched. For a second, I thought he was going to pull the trigger. Then finally, he lowered the gun. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "A mistake," the voice outside whispered. A deep, terrible feeling crawled into my stomach. Carter turned away. "We need to move. Now." I nodded quickly. "Where?" He gestured toward the back door. "My truck's in the garage. It's got supplies. We'll drive as far as we can and figure out the rest later." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than waiting here to die. We moved fast. Carter led the way, shotgun at the ready. I stayed close behind. The humming outside had stopped. The silence was worse. When we reached the garage door, Carter hesitated. "If anything happens," he muttered, "don't stop running." "Got it." I nodded. He reached for the door handle. And that's when the power cut out. Everything went dark. The air turned heavy, suffocating. I felt something move in the blackness. And then, right by my ear, a whisper. "You let us in a long time ago." The garage door exploded open. I saw shapes. Hands reaching. Smiles stretching too wide. Carter fired. The flash from the shotgun lit up the room for a split second, long enough to see them. Dozens. Inside the house. They had gotten in. Carter grabbed my arm and threw me toward the truck. "Go." I didn't hesitate. I ran. Straight into the dark. And behind me, the sound of laughter. Laughter that sounded just like me. I ran. I couldn't see. The darkness was absolute. But I didn't need to. I knew they were behind me. I could feel them. Their presence pressed against my back like cold fingers grazing my spine. The truck was somewhere in front of me. I had to get to it. Behind me, Carter kept firing. The shotgun blasts lit up the garage in split-second flashes. Each time I saw them. Too many of them. Their bodies were wrong. Some of them were stretched too tall, their limbs too long, their mouths too wide. Others were perfect replicas of people I knew. Russ, my mother, my old boss from the diner. All watching me run, all smiling. Then I saw it. The truck. I lunged forward, my fingers fumbling for the door handle. My hands were slick with sweat, trembling so hard I almost dropped the keys. Carter was shouting something, but the gunfire drowned him out. The truck door wouldn't open. It was locked. My pulse spiked. I clawed at the keys, trying to find the right one. My hands were shaking too much. Damn it, damn it, damn it. A voice whispered inches from my ear. "You're too late." I turned just in time. Something grabbed my wrist. Ice-cold fingers. Skin too smooth, too tight, like plastic stretched over bone. I screamed. Carter fired again. The blast ripped through the thing's arm, and it didn't bleed. It didn't even flinch. I found the key. I shoved it into the lock and yanked the door open. Carter slammed the shotgun into one of their faces and bolted for the passenger seat. He barely made it inside before I threw the truck into reverse. The tires screeched against the concrete. I slammed the accelerator, sending the truck flying backward. Bodies thumped against the sides, some of them real, some of them not. I didn't stop to check which was which. The garage door was still down. Didn't matter. I floored it. The truck smashed through the metal. The windshield cracked, but we burst through. And then we were on the road. I gripped the wheel like my life depended on it, because it did. The truck roared forward, bouncing over curbs and potholes as I swerved onto the street. The town was still dead silent. But they were out there. Figures in the dark, standing in rows along the sidewalks, watching us as we passed. Carter reloaded the shotgun with shaking hands. "We need to get the hell out of here." No argument from me. I kept driving. The further we got from the house, the worse I felt. Like we weren't really escaping. Like we were being led. I shook the thought away. Keep moving. That was all that mattered. Carter exhaled sharply. "We need to find a radio." I blinked. "What?" "The alerts. If the signal is still broadcasting, we might be able to figure out what's going on." I hesitated. The emergency alert had been repeating the same message over and over. Don't acknowledge them. Don't speak to them. Don't listen to them. But something had changed. I remembered what I heard earlier. Do not let them hear you. Had it been trying to warn us? Carter grabbed the radio dial and started turning it, static crackling through the speakers. I focused on the road, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The town blurred past us, dark houses, abandoned cars, more figures standing perfectly still. Then the radio clicked. A voice cut through the static. "If anyone can hear this, stay inside. Do not engage with them. Do not respond. If you have already spoken to them." The signal broke. More static. Carter spun the dial, cursing under his breath. "Come on." Then, a different voice. A voice I recognized. "Hello." I almost slammed on the brakes. It was me. My own voice, crackling through the speakers. If anyone can hear this, please. I don't know what's happening. I think I made a mistake. The breath caught in my throat. Carter went rigid. I didn't mean to talk to them. I didn't know. But now they won't stop. They keep whispering. They keep asking me questions. I switched the radio off. Silence. Carter turned to me slowly. What the hell was that? I swallowed. My hands were shaking. That wasn't me. We both knew that wasn't true. It was me. But not. Carter exhaled through his nose. Keep driving. I didn't argue. We drove in silence. The town stretched ahead of us, endless and empty. The road was too long, the streetlights flickering like dying stars. And then up ahead, a gas station. The first real sign of life I'd seen all night. Its neon sign flickered weakly. Open. I pulled into the lot, the tires crunching over gravel. The station was empty, but the door was wide open. I turned to Carter. Do you think? Doesn't matter, he muttered. We need supplies. I nodded. We stepped out of the truck. The air was too still. No wind, no crickets, no hum of distant cars. Only the quiet. Carter kept the shotgun raised as we stepped inside. The store was pristine. Fully stocked shelves. A humming refrigerator. Bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. As if nothing was wrong. I swallowed hard. Hello? No answer. Carter moved to the counter. See if they have a radio. I turned toward the back. That's when I saw it. The security monitor. It was mounted above the register, displaying 4 different camera angles. One outside, one in the aisles, one behind the counter, and one pointed at the entrance. I looked at the screen. There we were, Carter and me, standing by the register. But something was wrong, because in the monitor, Carter wasn't holding the shotgun. I blinked, looked at him. The gun was still in his hands. But on the screen, his arms were empty. My mouth went dry. I turned back to the monitor. And then, Carter turned and looked directly into the camera. Not the Carter standing next to me. The one in the monitor. And he was smiling. I whipped around. The real Carter was staring at the screen, his expression dark. That's not me, he whispered. I turned back, but the monitor was blank. Then, behind me, the sound of a door creaking open. And a voice. You're not supposed to be here. The voice sent an ice-cold jolt down my spine. I turned slowly. Behind the counter stood a man, or something that looked like one. His skin was waxy, his features too smooth, like someone had sculpted him out of melted plastic. His eyes were sunken, shadowed, but his smile was perfect. Too perfect. I didn't hear him come in. I didn't see him move. Carter tensed beside me, his grip tightening on the shotgun. Who the hell are you? The man's grin widened. Just the cashier. He tilted his head. Did you need something? Every instinct I had screamed, don't answer. Carter didn't say anything either. His finger hovered over the trigger. The man's smile didn't fade, but something in his face changed. The edges of his mouth twitched. The skin around his eyes shuddered like a glitching screen. Like he was waiting for us to speak. The emergency alerts warning rang in my ears. Do not engage. Do not respond. Do not let them hear you. I forced myself to stay silent. The man's head jerked slightly to the side. The movement was unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. You're being rude. Carter lifted the shotgun an inch higher. The cashier let out a quiet chuckle. You should eat something. You've been driving a long time. I hadn't told him that. My stomach twisted. Carter glanced at me. He wanted to leave. I could see it in his face. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Because something was wrong with the cameras. The monitor behind the counter flickered back to life, showing a grainy loop of the security feed. Carter and I, standing exactly where we were right now. Except, we weren't alone. On the screen, behind us, there was a third figure, standing directly between us. A woman. Her back was to the camera, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. I went rigid. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't feel anyone behind me, but I knew she was there. The cashier's grin stretched wider. You should turn around now. Carter saw it too. His entire body locked up, his finger tightening on the trigger. I wanted to move, I couldn't. The woman on the screen started to twitch. Her head snapped to the side. Carter grabbed my wrist. We're leaving. I didn't argue. We backed toward the door slowly. The cashier didn't move, but his eyes followed us. His grin never faded. The second we hit the glass doors, Carter yanked the handle. Locked. A sharp click echoed through the gas station. The humming of the refrigerators stopped. The overhead lights dimmed. I spun back toward the counter. The cashier was gone. The security feed flickered. The woman behind us was closer now. I felt it. A slow, cold breath against my neck. A whisper. You were never supposed to make it this far. Carter raised the shotgun and fired. The glass exploded. He grabbed my arm and we ran. The road that never ends. We bolted toward the truck. Behind us, something moved. Not footsteps. Not running. Something else. Like the sound of tearing fabric. I didn't look back. Carter reached the truck first. He threw open the passenger door and shoved me inside. The second I hit the seat, he was in the driver's side, slamming the keys into the ignition. The truck roared to life. I glanced at the gas station as we peeled out of the lot, and the cashier was still standing at the counter, watching us, smiling, like we had never moved, like we had never left. Then the gas station lights flickered out, and it was gone. I turned to Carter, my breath coming in sharp gasps. We need to find a way out of town. He didn't answer. His hands gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. His eyes were locked on the road ahead. Something was wrong. Carter? His jaw clenched. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. The gas station was in front of us. The same one. Neon sign buzzing. Open. I whipped around. The way we had come. It wasn't there. No broken glass. No shattered door. Just an empty road that stretched into blackness. The truck's headlights barely reached the pavement. It was like we had been turned around without moving. Like the town itself was folding in on us. Carter let out a slow breath. Drive straight, I whispered. Don't stop. He nodded. We passed the gas station again. And again. And again. Each time, the neon sign flickered. Each time, the door was still open. We weren't getting out. I gripped the dashboard. My heart pounded against my ribs. We had to do something different. Turn off the headlights. Carter frowned. What? Turn them off. I didn't know why I said it. I just knew the road was lying to us. Carter hesitated, then killed the lights. Darkness swallowed us. For a split second, I thought we had died. Then, the neon sign disappeared. No gas station. No town. Nothing but the dark. Carter sucked in a breath. His grip on the wheel trembled. I reached out and flipped the headlights back on. The road ahead was different. No more gas station. No more endless loop. Just a highway stretching into the distance. Carter floored the accelerator. Neither of us spoke. Not until we were miles away. Not until the night started to feel real again. Then finally, Carter let out a long breath. We need to find a radio. I nodded. Because whatever was happening, the alerts weren't enough anymore. We needed answers. And fast. We drove in silence. The truck's headlights cut through the empty road, but it didn't feel like we had escaped. Something was still watching. I could feel it in my bones. Carter kept his hands tight on the wheel, his knuckles pale. The shotgun rested in his lap. Loaded. Ready. Neither of us dared to turn the radio back on. Not yet, because we both knew what we had heard. A voice, my voice, speaking through the static, asking for help. I swallowed, forcing myself to focus. First, we needed to figure out where the hell we were. The town was gone now. No streetlights, no houses, just miles of black roads stretching into the void. It was like we had been dumped in the middle of nowhere. The problem was, this nowhere felt bigger than it should be. We need a sign, Carter muttered. His voice was strained, edged with something close to panic. A landmark. Anything. I nodded, but the road just kept stretching forward, and forward, and forward, like it would never end. Then, something appeared in the distance. A metal sign, standing just off the road, barely catching in the glow of the headlights. Carter slowed the truck. Finally, he breathed, relief flickering across his face. We pulled up beside it. The sign was rusted, its edges jagged and curling. I leaned out the window to read it. Welcome to Ashwood. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. That couldn't be right, because Ashwood was the town we had just left. I looked back at the road behind us. Nothing but darkness. No town, no buildings, just a yawning, empty stretch of highway that shouldn't exist. Carter exhaled sharply. This doesn't make sense. I said nothing, because it wasn't just the name of the town that was wrong. It was the bullet holes riddling the metal. Fresh, still gleaming, like someone had been shooting at it. Carter followed my gaze and swallowed. Let's keep moving. I didn't argue. The broadcast that shouldn't exist. We drove in silence for another hour. The road stretched endlessly, twisting through the dark in ways that didn't make sense. I stopped checking the clock. It only made things worse. Then Carter did something reckless. He turned on the radio. Static crackled through the speakers. I went rigid. Carter, just listen, he muttered. The sound was broken, like a transmission struggling to push through heavy interference. Then a voice cut through. If anyone can hear this. Carter turned the volume up. The voice was distorted. It sounded like it had been recorded over itself too many times. This is emergency broadcast signal 417. If you are still within Ashwood's limits, you need to leave. The town has collapsed. The road is no longer safe. The signal warped. Then it said something that made my stomach turn. Do not go past the sign. Carter and I locked eyes. The sign we had passed 10 miles ago. The transmission glitched. If you have gone past the sign, the voice stuttered. The road is lying to you. The town is lying to you. You are not where you think you are. The radio let out a high-pitched whine. Then a voice overlapped with it. Not the same one. Deeper. Wrong. You should turn around. I lunged for the dial and shut it off. Silence. Carter stared straight ahead. His jaw clenched, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The truck kept moving. Neither of us spoke, because the message had been clear. The road was lying to us, and we had gone too far. The thing that shouldn't exist. I checked my phone. No signal. No time. No battery percentage, even though I had just charged it. I shoved it back into my pocket and rubbed my temples. Carter kept his eyes locked on the road, but something about him had changed. His breathing was too steady. His grip on the wheel too relaxed. Carter? No response. I sat up straighter. His hands weren't shaking anymore. I turned to him, my heart starting to pound. His face was wrong. Not by much. Just enough that I knew. Carter wasn't blinking. His eyes were locked forward, mouth slightly open, expression frozen. Like he was wearing a mask of himself. Something cold and suffocating settled over my chest. Carter. No answer. I grabbed his arm. His skin was cold. Then, without warning, his head jerked toward me. But it didn't move naturally. It snapped, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. I recoiled. His eyes were locked on me now. Wide. Unmoving. And his mouth. It was stretching. Not smiling. Not frowning. Just opening. Farther than it should. Too far. I gasped and shoved him. His body slumped, like a mannequin losing balance. The truck veered. I grabbed the wheel and wrenched it back. My breathing was sharp, my hands clammy. My entire body trembled. Then, Carter spoke. We passed the sign. His voice was wrong. Layered. Like something else was speaking with him. Something bigger. I stared at him, my pulse hammering. You're not Carter. He tilted his head. The skin around his mouth split. You should not have gone past the sign. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded. The tires screeched. We slid sideways, throwing me hard against the door. Then silence. Dust swirled in the headlights. I turned to Carter. He was gone. The driver's seat was empty. Like he had never been there. Like I had been driving alone this entire time. The truck's headlights flickered. Somewhere outside, something moved. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to move. I needed to find him. But as I reached for the door handle, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The radio had turned back on, and my own voice whispered through the static. You should have listened. The sound of my own voice coming through the radio made my blood turn to ice. You should have listened. The static crackled, twisting the words, dragging them out. I stared at the empty driver's seat, my breathing sharp and uneven. Carter was gone, vanished, like he had never been there. I gripped the door handle with numb fingers. Something was out there. Something had taken Carter. I had to move. I had to. A sound echoed from the darkness outside. A single knock on the passenger window. Slow. Hollow. Wrong. I didn't turn my head. I knew better now. But I saw it. The reflection in the glass. A shape, tall, crooked, its limbs too long. Waiting. Watching. The knock came again. I clenched my teeth. Do not acknowledge the voices outside. I shut my eyes and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe. Then, without warning, the truck door unlocked. Click. The handle twitched. It was trying to get in. I lunged across the seat, fumbling to relock the door. But before I could, the radio screeched, louder than before. Pain shot through my skull, a white-hot pressure behind my eyes. Then the voice returned. Only this time it wasn't mine. Let him go. I froze. It was Carter. His voice, but wrong. It echoed through the speakers, layered on itself, tangled with the static. Let him go, let him go, let him go. The truck's headlights flickered, and in that brief stuttering glow, I saw them, standing on the road ahead, a row of figures motionless, facing me, their shapes barely human, their faces gone, smooth, hollow, blank. And Carter was among them, standing still as a corpse, his body stiff and unnatural, his mouth open, but his face wasn't his anymore. It was shifting, unraveling, becoming something else. And in his place, something was watching through him. I knew then, Carter was gone, and whatever had taken him, it wanted me next. The road that led to nothing. I floored the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching, the engine roaring through the night. The figures on the road didn't move. They let me pass, but in the rearview mirror, I saw them turn, slowly, all of them, following. I focused on the road ahead, forcing my thoughts into place. There had to be a way out. I just had to find it. The sign had warned us. The road was lying. If I kept driving, I would just keep ending up back where I started. I had to do something else. I had to break the pattern. I slammed the steering wheel hard to the left. The truck veered, skidding off the road, tires kicking up dust and gravel as I plowed into the open field beside it. The truck bounced violently, the shocks groaning beneath me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The radio kept hissing, spitting out voices that weren't real. Turn around. Come back. You don't belong here. The field stretched on for what felt like forever, nothing but darkness in every direction. Then, the truck's headlights hit something impossible. A second gas station. Exactly like the one Carter and I had left behind. Neon sign buzzing. Open. My stomach twisted. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, dust curling into the air. This wasn't real. I knew it wasn't real. But the doors were open. And inside, the cashier was waiting. Watching me. Smiling. The man who wasn't a man. I stepped out of the truck. The air was thick, pressing against my skin, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The cashier didn't move. Just stood behind the counter, his face blank. Too smooth. Too perfect. Like a mask stretched too tight over something that wasn't human. I swallowed hard. You knew we'd come back, didn't you? I whispered. The cashier's smile widened. No one leaves Ashwood. I stepped closer. You took him. He tilted his head. You went past the sign. My pulse pounded. I clenched my fists. Where is Carter? The cashier didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed at the security monitor behind him. I followed his gaze. The screen flickered, grainy footage twisting into focus. The inside of the gas station. Me, standing exactly where I was right now. And behind me, Carter, standing in the doorway. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The door was empty. Nothing but the blackness outside. But the security footage kept playing, and on the screen Carter, or whatever was wearing his body, smiled. I turned back to the cashier. His face was different now. Familiar. It was my face, stretched over his bones, grinning back at me. You were never supposed to make it this far. The lights flickered. The walls shuddered. And in the security footage, Carter moved. Not in real time. Not on the screen. Behind me. I felt it before I saw it. The cold breath. The hand gripping my shoulder. And then, darkness. The broadcast that will never end. Static. That was the first thing I heard. Then my own voice. If you are still within Ashwood's limits, you need to leave. My eyes snapped open. I was in the truck. The road stretched ahead, the headlights cutting through the night. I gasped, sitting up. Carter was gone. The radio was still playing. And on the horizon, the neon sign of a gas station flickered. I gripped the wheel. My hands trembled. I knew what was happening now. I had become part of the loop. The same broadcast. The same warning. The same trap. Ashwood had taken Carter. Now it had me. And soon, someone else would come down this road. Someone else would pass the sign. And I would be waiting. Just like the ones before me. Just like the ones after.